Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Q&A. You'll have some awesome questions that you submitted. I'm really excited to go over these. I think they're really interesting questions. So let's dive in. So the first question was, is there a benefit to continue a CGM, continuous blood glucose monitor, for those of us with blood sugar resistance, insulin resistance? So essentially, if there's benefit to using a CGM if you don't have diabetes. So CGMs, if you're not familiar, are little monitors that go into your skin and sit there, and they last about 10 days. They monitor your blood sugar every 5 minutes. And so you get like an app and you get like a reading, like a little graph of what your blood sugar is doing all day long. Back in the day, all we had was like the finger prick option to get your blood sugar tested. So you prick your finger, you get the blood, and you get a one-time reading of what your blood sugar is doing. You'd have to do this multiple times a day, like when you wake up, after you eat, etc. So CGMs have been really revolutionary for people with diabetes to have better control and monitoring their blood sugar throughout the day. Now the trend is that the people are starting to recognize that there's value outside of just using it with people who have diabetes. So funny enough, this question came in this week. I happened to get an email this week from a company that produces Dexcom, which is one of the main brands on the market for CGMs. And they reached out about if I would be interested in using CGM with my clients who are, they're kind of marketing to people who are just like an average person who's looking to lose weight or just improve their health metrics and stuff like that. So it's definitely starting to be a bigger trend, which is probably why you heard about it outside of the world of diabetes. So CGMs are a great tool. We'll talk about pros and cons and what my recommendation would be. But before we get to that, let's just talk about blood sugar response in general. So there's three different things that can happen when you eat carbs, three different responses that your body can have when you eat carbs. The first is that you will have more energy. If you have more energy, that means you had a low blood sugar to begin with. So that's why the extra carbs helped you get more energy. So that means you had low blood sugar. The second option is you get more sleepy, more tired. That means that you ate too many carbs or you had too high a blood sugar to start with, and then you just kind of went overdose. So if you've heard the term carb coma, that's what it's kind of getting at. But you don't have to necessarily go that far. You could just feel more tired and more sleepy. A lot of times people feel that after like lunch. They eat a lunch meal, they start to feel sleepy. It's because your blood sugar is going too high. Option number three is you eat and you feel the same, or you feel no change. That's ideal. That means your blood sugar is well regulated. So just think about those three things whenever you are eating meals. Are you more energetic, more tired, or consistent? And we want to be going for consistent. So when we're looking into CGM, it can be really helpful to understand what your body's doing with blood sugar in response to different foods. Now, the valuable piece with a CGM is that everybody's body responds differently to different foods, right? We're not robots, and we're all different from the next person. So one person can eat rice and have maybe a small blood sugar spike. Someone else can eat that same rice and have a much different reaction. So the CGM, I think, is valuable in the fact that everybody's response is different to certain carbs. You will just kind of naturally see this happen. And I think it's also helpful to see what's going on outside of just eating, because there are other things that spike or lower your blood sugar outside of food. We know that stress is the huge one. We know that sleep is the huge one. And we know that exercise can all affect blood sugar. We also know that alcohol can do. There's so much outside of food that you might not be thinking about that can affect blood sugar. So for example, I know a dietitian who used a CGM, did a trial with a CGM, and her biggest takeaway that was that her biggest blood sugar spikes were not because of food, they were because of stress. She noticed when she was in a stressful meeting, a stressful work situation, her blood sugar would spike up even more than like certain foods. And then again, it can be also helpful to see if there's just certain foods that really trigger you that you might not have had any idea about. In general, we know what some of those high foods are, or like high, like foods that are tend to spike our blood sugar are. So if you remember back to some of our modules, I've talked about high glycemic foods. If you want to look that up, that chart up, high glycemic foods tend to spike blood sugar. But again, those are just general rules of thumb. It's not set in stone, and everybody's physiology is different. So a CGM can kind of help fill in the gaps. Could be really interesting data for sure. Absolutely. I would never say don't do it. Like if you have the money and you are interested, I think it could be a really interesting tool. But finances are definitely a big part of it. And you absolutely do not need it. It is not required. It is not necessary to be able to balance your blood sugar, improve insulin resistance, improve your A1C. You can absolutely do those things through diet and lifestyle changes. A CGM is just, it's a nice little piece of data if you want it. So prices that we're looking at are about $150 for 10 days. If you have diabetes, then you obviously are going to have better insurance coverage and stuff like that. If you don't have insurance, or if you don't have diabetes, insurance will probably not cover a CGM. But we're looking at $150 for 10 days, which is honestly probably how much you need to get some good data. You want to go through some days, some routines, weekdays, weekends, see what's going on. 10 days is probably plenty to gather the data you need. You don't need to wear it long term, in my mind. So it's very cost prohibitive. That's long term, it's very cost prohibitive. And again, there's a lot you can do without it. It's certainly not like something I feel like is necessary for the majority of people trying to lose weight. I think it's just interesting data that could be helpful if someone wanted to spend the money. So that is my stance on it. And if we're totally stuck with weight loss, if we're totally weight loss like plateaued, it could be a tool we bring in. But again, for most people, it's certainly not the first place I would go. It's certainly not going to be life-changing information. Like there's 90% of blood sugar balance and weight loss and stuff like that can be done without a CGM, but it can certainly be interesting and helpful and help you learn more about your physiology. So that's my long-winded answer to what do I think about that. But if you do want to pursue it, let me know. I can hook you up with this company that reach out to me. I would love to have a guinea pig if someone's interested in running one on themselves. So the next question, great question, is what do we do about holiday eating? So I talk about a lot of these tips a lot, but some of them might be new. So if you heard it before, some of these ideas are going to be repeated. But kind of going back to the carb thing, one of the biggest things you can do with holiday eating is pairing your carbs. Holiday foods tend to be so carb heavy. We're talking sweet potatoes. We're talking breads and rolls and pies and desserts. It's so carb heavy, especially Thanksgiving now that I'm thinking about it. It's so carb heavy. So one of the biggest things you can do is just making sure you're paying attention to your blood sugar. I don't know about you, but I'm always one of those people that like, I will like have to have that like post Thanksgiving meal nap. So I'm guilty of it too. But it's just because it's such a carb heavy meal. It's such a heavy meal in general, and it's such a carb heavy meal. But what I think is truly the problem around the holidays is not necessarily that one meal. It's how much it drags out. So I don't know about you, but it's usually not just one Thanksgiving meal. It's Thanksgiving meal with my family, but then it's Thanksgiving meal with friends. And then it's Thanksgiving meal, like if you have coworkers and office parties, it's like multiple Thanksgiving meals all in a row for weeks. That's what starts to really add up. So I wouldn't worry so much about like that one actual Thanksgiving Day meal. Obviously, I'd be mindful of your portions, mindful of your carb pairing, mindful of, are you drinking your water, stuff like that, alcohol intake, stuff like that. I think what really sends people over the edge, or what makes it feel like a lot, is the whole ongoing week of it, or the excess of these Thanksgiving meals over and over and over. So that's what I would be really careful about. And I'm not saying don't go to those things. I'm not saying avoid those events, but I'm saying if you're going to be having sweet potato casserole 5 times, you probably don't need a huge serving of it every single time. So my what's the word? My theory around Thanksgiving eating is making room for the special stuff. Like I am going to make room for my grandma's homemade pumpkin pie. Like I can't get that any time of year. I cannot get that. Like, it is not the same as the grocery store pumpkin pie. It is like handmade from scratch with love pumpkin pie. I'm going to enjoy that all day, every day. But I'm going to skip out on like the rolls that came from the grocery store. I'm going to skip out on the mashed potatoes that I could eat any day. I'm going to skip out on a lot of the average stuff, and I'm going to skip out on the stuff that's not really made well. Like if it's from the grocery store, it's someone brings it at a potluck and you know it was just a reheated package thing. I'm going to save my not that you need to save calories, but I'm going to I'm going to enjoy the things that are really special that I can only get that time of year that mean a lot to me. That's what I'm going to enjoy. I'm probably going to skip out or have less or smaller portions of those other things that just aren't good quality or aren't very special. So that's my philosophy going into Thanksgiving. I think the other big thing is just making sure you stick to a routine, making sure you're still trying to get some activity level in, making sure you're still drinking your water, making sure like, so maybe a Thanksgiving meal is at like 2 o'clock, making sure you're still eating a breakfast, making sure you're still doing regular things throughout the week outside of those meal times. I think that's important too. I think it's so easy to get sucked up in the holiday world that you lose your routine and then you just throw everything out the door. So I would be very careful about routine. I'd be very careful about like what events you're going to and like kind of picking and choosing your battles. That's my approach. And then just enjoy the good stuff. Enjoy like the really good like pies, and I just keep thinking about this pie, but just enjoy the good stuff, pass on the average stuff. That is my rule. That's my best advice. The next question was, okay, so this was interesting. So what, is there any benefit to changing up your macros and calories periodically? Yeah, you might have heard people talking about this. So there's a lot of different like terms for it. And it's kind of popular in the workout bodybuilding world. That's where you'll see it talked about the most. That's kind of what they do in, and I've talked about this before, it's kind of what they do in bodybuilding. So to be able to create that really chiseled physique that you see in those bodybuilding competitions, that takes an approach of changing your calories and macros constantly so that your body does not get stagnant and continues to be pushed kind of beyond its typical limits. So you'll see this concept a lot in that world. It's certainly not my first approach to weight loss at all, or even one of the tools I would use at all. It could be helpful in some very rare scenarios, but the biggest issue I see with it is adherence. It is extremely complicated if you are going to start doing macros, at this ratio for this many weeks, and then you switch your macros to this ratio for this many weeks. That's very hard from a tracking perspective, from a meal planning perspective, and from an adherence perspective. I think for all of those reasons, I tend to stay away from cycling. In theory, again, physiologically, I can see the benefits. The idea is kind of like not letting your body get stagnant, keeping your body guessing, pushing it to do more. But in reality, for the average person, the adherence makes it just almost impossible. You're basically you're like people who are doing these bodybuilding competitions are eating chicken and broccoli for like every single meal. Like it's not a fun lifestyle. So that's kind of my theory on it. I will say that there is another scenario where I see carb cycling come in. So carb cycling is when you obviously kind of lower and increase your carbs kind of depending on a couple different reasons. I see people carb cycle for workouts. So people who maybe are doing cardio on certain days will up their carbs on their cardio days. And if they're doing weight training, well, you need carbs for weight training too. I guess if you have like a non-workout day, you have an off day, they'll lower their carbs. So higher carb, lower carb can be depending on your activity level. Honestly, for the majority of people, it really just kind of averages out. That's why I don't really push it. But people who are really, really into exercise and have really intense exercise regimens, again, this is all kind of in the physique bodybuilding world. But for people with very intense exercise regimens, you can see people utilizing carb cycling depending on their activity level. The other time that I've seen people use carb cycling is with periods and their cycles. And so there's a theory that, well, it's not a theory. So your body needs more carbs to produce hormones, right? So carbs are building blocks for our body. And if you go too low carb for so long, your body can lower hormone production. So some people who tend to eat lower carb normally will carb cycle up, will eat more carbs when they are ramping up for ovulation, when their body needs more carbs to produce hormones. So this is typically more used with people who are already low carb and then need to go up. So they'll cycle between those two depending on their time in their period. Other people might do this as well because of, well, our next question is about actually this. But some people will carb cycle for like PMS, or just kind of, some people just find they feel better at different phases of their cycle eating different levels of carbs. Just like there's an idea of seed cycling. You may have heard of seed cycling. It's eating different seeds at different times of your cycle. It's just kind of feeding your body the nutrients that it needs to support different phases of your cycle. So a lot of it's just, there's not a lot of research behind it. A lot of it is just trial and error and seeing if your body feels good. So if you tend to have like very crazy hormonal symptoms, it may be something to explore, seed cycling or carb cycling. But for like 90% of people who are in this program and looking to lose weight, 95 actually, I would say do not even worry about carb cycling and calorie cycling. It is so difficult to track. It is so unrealistic for the average lifestyle that I would not worry about it. But just to give you context of why you might see people talk about it, why it's kind of popular, those are some of the uses that people will use it for. That didn't totally make sense, but you know what I'm saying. All right. And then kind of along the same lines, the last question was, what are some ways to work through basically the symptoms of your period? I think I've talked about this in a Q&A before. So if I'm saying some of the same stuff, this may have been on a previous Q&A. But typically our PMS symptoms are coming from a dramatic shift in hormonal levels. Typically we are experiencing a spike in estrogen, a drop in progesterone. Typically those two hormones buffer each other. And typically a lot of symptoms come from a dramatic shift in where they're no longer balancing and buffering each other out. And then also just general inflammation that goes along with your monthly cycle. That's where we tend to get a lot of just nasty symptoms. The symptoms that Melanie was talking about was low energy, food cravings. I mean, the list goes on though. All of those symptoms that come with PMS and that time of the month is typically from a dramatic shift in hormones and inflammation. So what are some things you can do? I'm just kind of going to go through my list here. The big things you want to do are, again, we want to work on those hormones and balancing those hormones, and we want to lower that inflammation. So things that are going to lower the inflammation are reducing your stress. I think this is a just ongoing thing that we're always talking about, but being especially mindful of it when you are having these PMS symptoms. Reducing alcohol. So one of our clients just brought this up because I had mentioned it in a module, but alcohol increases estrogen because of liver detox being put on hold. I talk about this a lot in other modules, but remember, we already have a high estrogen when we are experiencing our PMS symptoms. So drinking alcohol just exacerbates it more. So something you might want to trial is cutting out alcohol during kind of that window around your period and your symptoms, seeing if that helps. Also reducing inflammatory foods. Now, inflammatory foods are different for everyone, but just generally speaking, things like gluten and dairy are good starting points. You could trial removing either of those during your period and see if that helps. I personally would start with dairy because I think dairy just kind of exacerbates a lot of things. Like, I don't know about you, but I tend to get more acne during my period. And dairy always kind of goes hand in hand with acne for me. So everyone's a little bit different, but if you want to trial and error gluten or dairy as inflammatory foods, also if you've done a food sensitivity test, you would know more specifically what your inflammatory foods are. But that could be a great starting place. So alcohol, gluten, dairy, you could trial all of those if you tend to have bad symptoms and see how you do otherwise. Also, if we're going to be reducing alcohol, just make sure we are chugging so much water during that time. It can be so helpful to do that. And I don't know about you, but exercise is a major help for me when I'm on my period. It dramatically reduces my symptoms. And then I'm going to throw out some supplements that have been researched and shown to be very helpful. So magnesium and B6. B6 is a very specific one. Magnesium is kind of used for a lot of things, but B6 is very specific, very well researched in regards to PMS symptoms. So it's 50 milligrams twice a day. So definitely check that out. Vitex is a supplement that will help balance hormones. So I wouldn't throw Vitex in unless you've done some testing with your hormones. But Vitex is a supplement that, again, if our symptoms are coming from those major hormone shifts, Vitex can be a really helpful balancer. And then selenium is good for progesterone production, and then omegas and fish oils can help with that inflammation, like a high dose omega. So those are just some supplements as well. Definitely work on the food and lifestyle, alcohol, stress component, and those supplements can be great, especially the B6. There's just a ton of research to support B6 and PMS symptoms. So hopefully that gives you a little direction, some things to trial and error. I know it sucks to go through all those symptoms every single month, and it feels like you're getting thrown off the wagon because you have all these cravings and you're cranky and you don't want to go work out, and it's just like this, never ending battle with your cycle. So trial and error some of those things. It's very individualized as to what's going to work, but there's definitely things in your toolbox that could help. So great questions, you guys. Thank you for listening. Keep the questions coming next month. Well, I don't know if we'll do one next month because it's December, but if not, definitely January, we will get another one of these Q&As going. Thanks, guys.